Hello, Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, it has been said that the road to the Super Bowl goes through New Orleans. And this the week when President Trump came to town, the Los Angeles Rams are hoping to build a wall to stop the Saints. We'll be looking at what all the excitement is about tonight. We'll also discuss the new police chief, negotiating a deal with Harrah's, plus the strange case of a principal with a criminal record. And our Future Watch segment looks at plans for Convention Center Boulevard. Starting for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Tyler Bridges, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. There's Don. And that's David Hammer, investigative reporter. And I promise you Don is here. And we will get to her. Okay, but first, we are going to talk about, what else? The Saints. NFC Championship game. Big thing. Errol.
Well, if you remember last year, and I'm sure most people do, the Saints came one play away from getting into the championship game, and that was that huge pass in Minneapolis against the Saints, which just disheartened everybody. But we're here this year, and we're here for the game, and of course the excitement is immense. The Saints, the last time they were here, and they won, and they got into the Super Bowl, and they beat Minnesota. They beat the Vikings on that field goal, and so I think there's an enormous amount of excitement out there. And the good thing about there's two playoff games this weekend, and which means there'll be two losers that are just out of it. Now, I don't know who the other loser is going to be, but if for some reason we lose, at least we can say there's Mardi Gras the next day. Okay. Any other city, they just have to go back to the realities. In terms of who's going to win, I remember last week when we played in Philadelphia, everybody was pretty much confident we were going to beat Philadelphia. I think they were a little bit disillusioned by the way the game started. I mean, down 14 points and almost 21 points. There's not the same degree of confidence this week. I mean, nobody's saying the Saints can't win. I think most people locally are thinking that they can. But the Saints are a 3-point favorite. When you hear the local prognosticators, they're pretty much predicting the Saints. When you listen to the national guys, they're pretty much predicting the Rams. But everybody's pretty much agreeing on a close game.
I mean, I've heard a lot of national guys predicting the Saints will win, and it's a different scenario for us from what we're used to as Saints fans to be the favorites. But if you look at the time with Drew Brees and Sean Payton as coach and quarterback and coach, it's been an amazing run. If you think about it, 40 years, the first 40 years, and we never made it to an NFC Championship game and only won one playoff game. And in 12 years with them together, it's been 13 years, but remember Sean Payton was out for a year when he was suspended by the league. In 12 years together with Brees and Payton, 7 playoffs, 3 NFC Championship games, and then 2 more where we were seconds away, both in 2011 with the San Francisco loss and then last year with Minnesota at the very end, where we're seconds away from going to the NFC Championship games. That's very impressive.
It's very impressive, and Saints fans are loving every minute of it. Yeah. And they really let themselves be heard, to say the least. From what I understand, it was like the loudest it ever been in the Dome this past week.
This is what's different about football. You've been listening to a lot of the commentary this week, and of course they're talking about Saints fans being loud, about noise being a factor. I mean, okay, making noise has always been a part of football. That's why you had cheerleaders. But you never heard it as a strategy. You never heard a coach lecturing.
The head coach saying, "This is when I need you to make noise this week."
This is when I need the noise. And there was a day that people would have said, "Well, that's not good sportsmanship." I mean, or trying to make noise so the other team can't hear it. But now it's a factor, and even to the point where some modern stadiums, like the Seattle Stadium, were designed to be noisy.
That's the benefit of home field advantage. That's why it's a benefit.
And so, but I don't remember people always said, "Yeah, make noise." But this time, more than ever, they're really relying on fan noise to make a difference.
There are national commentators who've said that the loudest they've ever heard a stadium was with that blocked punt by Steve Gleason in the Domecoming game in 2006. That loud extended time, and the announcers didn't say anything because it was such an amazing moment. So we are right up there. I mean, Seattle's got well known, and Kansas City, Arrowhead Stadium, they're well known for the loud crowd noise. I want to make it clear that I'm not wearing a sweater vest. This is a Mike Thomas jersey.
Right. He's definitely in the
You're
spirit
ready.
and in the mood.
Yeah.
But we talk about the people in the dome, the fans in the dome. That building itself plays a part in the success of the season, and it plays a big part in the role of the Saints in this community. And Governor Blanco was recognized for that, for making sure that that dome was still going to be there and the Saints were going to stay.
Yeah, one of the terrible things that happened during Hurricane Katrina, folks will remember, was that about 75% of the dome roof peeled off, and the people inside got soaked, and it soaked everything, and a lot of mold was in there, and there was a question afterwards when the Saints were playing in San Antonio, should the Superdome be saved or not? And there was a ceremony this past Sunday before the Saints-Eagles game where Governor Blanco was recognized because it was her decision after Katrina. It was a tough political decision to rebuild the Superdome at a time when people still weren't in their homes, people hadn't come back,
We
basic
didn't have
services
schools
weren't.
and services.
Yeah, and she had been told that by the Commissioner Tagliabue, if you can't get the Saints back here for the next year, they may never come back, and that would only happen if the Superdome was rebuilt. So this was a moment where Kathleen Blanco, who is appears not to be in very good health right now, was recognized for something that really kind of history had forgotten of her effort to rebuild the dome and save the Saints back in 2005.
And so what exactly is there now physically at the dome that will remind people for years to come of her role?
Yeah, if you come in on the Poydras Street entrance at Gate A, there is a plaque there recognizing that, and then with the memory of that first game back in 2006 that you referenced, with the everybody remembers the Gleason punt.
The rebirth.
But nobody remembers who's the guy who scored the touchdown.
Curtis Deloach.
Oh, that's
Oh,
a
he
real
remembers,
fan.
yeah.
That's a real
Curtis
fan.
Deloach.
But that was such
And
an
he dunked it
exciting,
over the
wonderful,
goalpost.
just a wonderful day. I mean, that day was so beautiful. If you recall, in September, it was a gorgeous day.
Amazing.
Music outside. It was just really a fantastic event, the whole thing, and then to have that win. Okay, well, we want another sensational Sunday, hopefully.
It would be good.
This Sunday, NFC Championships, real excited about it. Okay, guys, all right, now. All right, let's now talk about a presidential visit. Yes, we have the Saints going to the NFC Championship, but we had the President of the United States here earlier this week, and you were there for that. Tyler.
Yeah, that was on Monday. He flew into the New Orleans International Airport. I was one of the people who had to wait 3 hours for him. It was really cold on Monday. We were all shivering. There was a number of Republican political leaders there who were to greet him. But then, and I was in the motorcade. We then went to the convention center, and President spoke to the American Farm Bureau, which was having its annual convention here, and predictably he talked about the need to build the wall, and also called on Democrats to reopen government. He's putting the blame on them, although at one point he had said that, hey, this is on me. It was an interesting thing watching the full speech of Trump instead of just watching a snippet of it. You know, he speaks from a teleprompter. The speech has already been written, but at various points he goes off the speech and he talks about things that he has done, like his victory 2 years ago, and it's kind of a strange thing where he almost seems to kind of remind himself how great he is, and then he goes back to script.
And so what was the reaction from the group that was there?
Well, the farmers and ranchers are mostly, from his political base. Right. And so they gave him a standing ovation several times. He was very well received inside. Outside, there were some protesters. Yeah,
well, we're hearing that maybe tariffs are impacting the farmers too, but they still gave them a good reception inside.
The evidence is that tariffs are beginning to hit some of the farmers. Louisiana is a state that's really dependent on keeping those tariffs down. So the retaliatory tariffs by China, Europe, and Canada are beginning to hit Louisiana and including the farmers.
And the president did talk about the Saints also.
Yes, he did.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Yeah, he gave a shout out to the Saints and to Drew Brees.
How about the Louisiana political leadership? Who was supportive of them there?
Well, all the Republican legislators or members of Congress were there. Congressman Richmond from New Orleans was not there. Garrett Graves, by the way, at the airport as the president stepped onto the tarmac, Garrett Graves from Baton Rouge gave him a king cake from Rouse's. And interestingly enough, during the president's speech, Ralph Abraham, who is from the Monroe area, who was challenging John Bell Edwards for governor, was sitting next to the governor. And Garrett Graves tweeted out that he couldn't hear the speech because they were arguing so much. I think he was joking.
Probably so. I wonder if that Rouse's King Cake made it to the dining table of the Clemson team when they came to visit.
In the White House.
Along with the hamburgers. Would have been really good dessert.
I heard from a source that it was consumed in Air Force One, came back, and at first the president didn't want it, and Graves kind of forced it on him, and he liked it.
Well, he should. And Rouse's has really good king
In fact,
cake.
they get a second slice.
Well, I hope.
What happens if the president got the baby?
Right.
Mexico would pay for it.
Mexico will pay for the next one.
Okay, we're getting a little out of hand here. That's okay. Let's now go over to David. And you did a story about a man who was a principal at two different charter schools here in New Orleans with a background. We'll let you tell the rest of the story.
Yeah, it was about Stanley Green. He was a principal at several schools here in New Orleans and had been a principal in St. Louis and in Atlanta or the Fulton County area in Georgia. The thing that I wanted to do the story, the reason I did the story is that there's an issue with how charter schools are regulated and what kind of control school boards and the state Bessie board has over these charter schools which operate independently. And so the question became, what kind of oversight is there on hiring of staff, teachers, and principals? And this was an example where a principal with a criminal record, and he had actually had his teaching license revoked in Louisiana in 2012 because he had a criminal record and had not been truthful about it. And he was hired by Algiers Charter Schools to be the principal at Fisher in 2016, Fisher Elementary on the West Bank, which no longer is operating. And then he was actually fired for sexual harassment of multiple teachers, and then was hired subsequent to that at Sylvanie Williams as principal, which is a New Orleans College prep school. And when I asked New Orleans College prep about it, they said, we didn't have any idea that he had even worked at Fisher the previous school year. And when I asked Algiers Charter about it, they said, we felt the Civil Rights Act of 1964 precluded us from denying him a position based on his criminal record. But anyway, he was actually, there was a civil trial this week where one of the teachers who had accused him of sexual harassment had sought damages for deliberate emotional distress and severe emotional distress, and a jury did find that he was not liable for causing severe emotional distress knowingly. But his take on it was, I was just being flirtatious, but there was a pretty salacious recording that she had made of him saying things about kidnapping and subduing people, and it was interesting.
Well, is he still employed with any school?
No, he's unemployed right now. He testified about that this week, and his attorney said that after he was cleared of liability and of severe emotional distress in this case, he hoped that he would soon be hired again here in New Orleans as a principal. But last year, the state legislature passed a law that said that you cannot hire, it precludes anyone from any school from hiring someone with a criminal record. So it'll be interesting to see if they challenge that.
What exactly is this record?
There was a credit card fraud in the 90s and I believe it was a domestic abuse, a weapons charge that were then subsequently expunged, but they were convictions.
And he did not have certification, right, when he got these principal jobs from
He
Louisiana?
had certification from other states, but he had his certification in Louisiana revoked in 2012 specifically because he had not been truthful about his criminal record.
How did he get the job in the first place?
I looked at his application. He acknowledged the revocation of his certification. He acknowledged his criminal record, said that he was working on expunging these things. And like I said, Algiers Charter, who initially hired him back here from St. Louis in 2016, said they felt that they could not deny him a position because of his criminal record.
There's a legal liability there too, that he could charge them with discrimination if.
That's what they're contending, but now there's this law that
way.
passed the legislature just this past year that specifically says that that you cannot hire someone with that record. So it'll be interesting to see if the same argument there would be challenged, would you be used to challenge this state law?
Well, the proponents, the supporters of charter schools say, though, that that charter schools actually have more accountability upon them, because if they do not live up to the criteria that they must meet to operate as a
They'll
charter
lose their
operator,
charter.
they lose their charter, and
But-
we have seen that happen.
And I agree, and we've seen that happen with the two schools where he was the teacher, was the principal. But I'll just say this, my story was not about the accountability for schools for their academic performance. I think that that's very clear that they have high accountability for academic performance. The question is, do they have that same level of accountability for their operations, whether it's school buses, which I've done stories about the lack of control over the school bus companies, and with hiring of employees.
So the charter schools, and I know that they have networks and collaborations, et cetera, have they responded to this at all or talked about how this could be avoided in terms of checking somebody's record? Because there is no centralized system, obviously, with these charter schools.
Well, it's interesting because there actually is a centralized system to monitor accountability of teachers and educators across the country, but it's a voluntary participation system. And so, you know, certain things don't show up in there. And actually, our network, Tegna News, actually did an investigation a few years ago that found that thousands of teachers were falling through the cracks. So as we look at this, maybe there will be some changes that will be imposed either by law or by the collaborative of charter schools to try to get a handle on this.
All right, David, thanks a lot. Over to Don now, Future Watch. Convention Center Boulevard, what's it looking like?
Well, it was shut down this week when the president was here, and it's been shut down on and off due to a major construction project. We've got some images to show. It's a $65 million renovation of Convention Center Boulevard, creating basically a linear park from Poydras Street all the way to Henderson at the upriver end of the convention center. It is several acres of trees and water features and more pedestrian friendly. The road is being turned into just one way in each direction instead of two ways in each direction. I used to live a couple blocks from the convention center, and I can tell you it is dangerous to cross that street. People pay no attention to the crosswalk. They seem to want to speed up to hit
it's like a
pedestrians
speedway
there.
at
It is
times,
like
yeah.
a speedway. So it will make it a much safer, nicer experience for convention goers as well as residents of the warehouse district. It also, I'm told, is the trend in convention centers. The indoor-outdoor space, there's Wi-Fi and electricity outside. There are spaces out there now where people could hold meetings or small receptions, gathering areas. The construction started last summer, and going through this April, they're really turning it into those two lanes on the city side of the convention center with a safety bump divider. So just, you know, almost like a rumble strip between those two. Then from April until September of 2020, the riverside will be closed as construction of that whole park area really truly begins. Also, this coming summer, a transportation center will be built. This is an area underneath the bridge, if you can picture it, between both Calliopes, the Calliope that goes out of town and the Calliope that comes downtown, under the bridge that will house 19 bus bays and also have an area both for taxis and ride sharing like Uber and Lyft. So all of those vehicles are being removed from Convention Center Boulevard. There is a lot of increased traffic in the warehouse district on the other streets because of Convention Center Boulevard being closed a lot and the construction being weird and being turned into a 2-lane road from a 4-lane road. But I'm told that the complaints have not been very high. The neighbors aren't complaining. The area businesses aren't complaining at record levels of any sort. It is 7.5 acres of landscape gardens, public art.
And the cost of all that is?
Cost of all of that is $65 million. All of that is convention center money. It's not city money. It's not state money. It's convention center money. And they say they really need to make improvements like this to attract the continued business. We'll see if it pays off. In addition to that, the upriver end will ultimately get a major hotel that will connect all of this together, and that's being negotiated now.
And now it's being heavily subsidized.
That
by
is being heavily
public
subsidized.
dollars by
Correct.
the convention center.
There's still research going on that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think
Discussion.
that's been fully
It has not been
decided.
No.
Yeah. And so, but for the beautification of the street, all of this that you're talking about, when is the timetable for that? When should it be finished?
Late 2020, summer 2020,
Okey-doke.
summer, fall, somewhere in
It's
there.
going to look pretty nice.
It will look pretty nice. The question is really, what is it going to do to traffic? Will Convention Center Boulevard truly be safer, and will those streets further in on the city side be way too congested because of this, or will traffic kind of figure its way out?
Okay, we'll see. All right, thanks a lot, Dawn. Tyler, over to you. And regarding Harris and the extension of their lease, if you can quickly sort of background what happened at the legislative session, because the deal fell through, what's going on right now?
Yeah, so we're going to move to the other end of Convention Center
exactly.
Boulevard. Yeah, last year Harris went to the legislature. They hired 21 lobbyists and asked the legislature to renew their license with the state, which is expiring in 2024. They asked for another 30-year license, and it blew through the House. No questions asked. Got over the Senate. Then there started being questions asked. A guy named Joe Yeager had written a letter to the editor that helped spark questions about whether the state was getting a fair deal. The Senate insisted ultimately passed a bill, but it was different than the House bill, and it said that Harris would have to pay a lot more upfront money to the state and also a lot more money per year, $20 million per year over the 30-year license extension. And Harris, or Caesars is the owner of Harris, they said that's too much. And so the House had passed one version, the Senate had passed another. They could not work it out at the end, and the regular session ended without a bill. And what my story with the Advocate reported was that Senate President Ilario, who had been very skeptical of the deal last year, saying, hey, I don't know whether this is a good deal for the state, he has got the legislature hiring a New Orleans consulting firm called Sisung to determine what is a fair deal for the state if the issue is brought back. And I interviewed Caesar's general manager, Dan Reel, who said that we're waiting for the outcome of this study to see what it says, but they would like to try again in 2019 to get that license renewed again, which is scheduled to expire in 2024. And in the meantime, as you can imagine, Caesars has not been spending money on upgrades for the casino or their hotel. Because they don't know whether how much longer they're going to be in business in the city.
Tyler, what was the role of the state the first time in the 90s? Because everybody talks about the deal that Mark Morial made.
Yeah.
Where was the state then? Because now they're so involved in this decision.
Well, the state got a $100 million payment, upfront payment that was under Governor Edwards, and then the city has, and then the state's been collecting a minimum of $60 million per year in taxes from the casino, and then the city gets some additional revenue because the casino actually sits on city land. And so the question again that this study, which will be released about February 15th, is supposed to determine what would be a fair deal for the state.
And that's the problem with the legislators felt is that they didn't know what the deal was. They were asked to vote on something where they really didn't know what the value was.
Yeah, the Caesars, they knew whether it was a good deal for them because they had all the proprietary information, but the state did not.
But what about the state? E, did you want to?
Well, I was going to mention that at least they did develop that second floor during the last year. That stood empty for a long time. And now it's going to be kind of an entertainment kind of complex.
Yeah, what Caesar says is they're over 100% capacity in their hotel. They want to build another hotel, but they're saying they don't want to do that unless they know they're going to stay. And again, people have raised the question, well, is it a fair deal? So perhaps this study will answer that question, and it really could pave the way for a license renewal for Caesars in this upcoming legislative session.
And there had been a study done last session, but all in the time of a week or something?
Yeah, it was a week, and I think Senator Ilario told me that it was like a college student rushing to finish a term paper at the level of quality.
So not believed to be very thorough, that
No.
last study. Okay.
So this should be better.
Well, yeah, we'll see what this one says. Okay, Tyler, thanks a lot. Errol, back over to you. We have a new police chief in the city of New Orleans.
It's been an amazing transition. It was only like 2 weeks ago that Police Chief Michael Harrison announced publicly that he was going to resign to be police chief in Baltimore. And here you were today. The new police chief was sworn in. Mayor Cantrell acted quickly. She said from the beginning that she was going to appoint in-house. There have been times in the past when, with times left a new police chief, and there'd be lengthy national searches. Mark Morial, for example, had a very, very long search, and then concluded that he didn't have anybody yet and started another search. And so it's been a very involved complex at times. But this moved quickly. And the person who was appointed, Sean Ferguson, who's the commander in the police department, he's commanded 3 different districts and plus the training academy, seems to have high respect. There hasn't been any real criticism of him, and Chief Harrison is supportive of him. He said Harrison was a mentor for him, And Cantrell, who is an activist in the Broadmoor neighborhood, says that she knew him even before she went into politics, because when he commanded the 2nd district, that was that district, and so she was working with him. And that's a good way to get to know your police when you're a neighborhood activist, because you really know the nitty-gritty and where the problems are.
And whether they respond.
Yeah, yeah. And so it was, but also in his capacity, he'd been working on a consent decree, and so he knows that. He knows what's going on with that too. And by the way, Baltimore is having a consent decree that has gone through, and so I think that was one of the selling points in terms of getting Chief Harrison. So it's an amazingly smooth process. I was trying to think, when, if ever, has a sitting New Orleans police chief been selected to another city's police chief?
Right.
And the only thing I can think of, and it's sort of the thing, was Richard Pennington, who was police chief, and he got the job in Atlanta. Now, between then, he ran for mayor, so I think he'd resigned. He wasn't police chief, but he was almost police chief. It was all within the same year, but as a rule, there haven't been a lot of demand for our police chiefs in other departments. Ronald Surpass was a deputy chief and got a job with a state police department, but he wasn't a police chief, and so it is sort of an honor.
It really speaks to what Harrison accomplished. I mean, when he came in, the consent decree was new, and we had done our call waiting series with the Advocate and WWL about NOPD call waiting and the poor response times, and with this terrible manpower crisis, and he really moved quickly to do some creative deployment and make up for that and improve response times. So, you know, if you're following that model where he was a lieutenant and then suddenly became the superintendent, and Ferguson follows a similar model, although he's been a commander for a lot longer, that would be, drawing from inside. If he has the same success level as Harrison, it would be good for the police department.
And it speaks volumes
does.
about how they're training them up. If we can continue to grow our own, that's a
real big important part of the
Also,
consent decree is the training of our police officers. We are out of time on this discussion. We have to look ahead now. Errol?
Okay. Well, the city has announced a lot of things that they're going to do this weekend because of the big game, some closings. Bourbon Street's going to close early. But one thing is, they said that they may or may not close Jackson Square and Washington Square Park early, depending on what happens. And I think what that translates into, if the Saints win and everybody's going crazy, they might close it early. If we're all kind of sad and moping around, there probably won't be any reason to close them early.
We need a quiet place, right, to hang our head. Okay, Tyler.
Yeah, at the event that I covered with former Governor Blanco, sitting next to her, of course, was her husband Raymond, who I'm very fond of over the years.
Coach.
And he is, Coach, as people know him, former coach. And he has been inducted into the Louisiana Political Hall of Fame, which is going to be in February in Lafayette,
Very good.
along with some others.
Thanks a lot, Tyler. Tom?
along with further discussions on that hotel upriver from the convention center. Sometime soon, a request for proposals will go out on further development of that whole parcel of land for retail and residential and mixed use kind of thing.
And I mentioned school buses as one of the charter school issues that I've been looking at, and I'll have some reports on that. I've done some already, and I'll have some more coming up.
All righty, guys. Thanks a lot for a fun discussion. Thank you guys for watching us. Of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Who dat and go
Whether
the
Saints win
Saints.
or not. Right?
We'll
Exactly.
still be here, but hopefully with big smiles on our faces. Have a good evening.